Have you ever sat at a family dinner and realized you weren't actually family? I was 26 years old when my own father raised a glass, smiled at everyone in the room, and announced, "Our son is the future of this family. Emily, well, she'll figure something out eventually." Everyone laughed, including my mother. That was the night I finally understood something. I was never the daughter they wanted. Before we begin, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy emotional revenge stories filled with family drama, shocking twists, and satisfying karma, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let me tell you the story that changed my life forever. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside Nashville, Tennessee. From the outside, my family looked perfect. My father, Richard Carter, owned a successful construction company. My mother, Linda, volunteered at every church fundraiser and neighborhood event. And my older brother, Jason. He was the pride of the family. According to my parents, Jason could do no wrong. If he got AC in school, he was under too much pressure. If I brought home straight A's, that's what we expect from you. When Jason wrecked Dad's pickup truck at 17, Dad hugged him and said, "Cars can be replaced." When I accidentally broke a $20 lamp while cleaning, Mom ignored me for 3 days. Back then, I kept telling myself, they're just harder on me because they believe in me. Looking back, I was lying to myself. The favoritism only got worse as we grew older. Jason dropped out of college after 1 semester. Dad called him an entrepreneur. I graduated with honors in accounting. Mom said, "A degree doesn't guarantee success." Jason borrowed nearly $80,000 from my parents to start a business. The business failed within 18 months. Dad blamed the economy. When I asked if they could lend me $5,000 to finish my CPA certification, Mom looked offended. "At your age, you should be paying your own way." That was the first time something inside me cracked. Not because they said no, but because I realized the rules were different for me. Still, I kept trying. Every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, I showed up with gifts, helped clean the kitchen, stayed late to wash dishes, remembered anniversaries, called every Sunday. I thought, if I loved them enough, maybe one day they'd love me back. I had no idea. Love doesn't grow where respect never existed. Everything finally changed on my father's 60th birthday. He rented a beautiful country club. Nearly 80 guests attended. Business partners, relatives, neighbors, family friends I'd known since childhood. Mom had spent weeks planning every detail. As usual, Jason arrived 45 minutes late. Everyone applauded when he walked in. I arrived early to help decorate. No one even noticed. Dinner was halfway over when Dad stood up with a champagne glass. "I want to thank everyone for celebrating this special day." Everyone cheered. He smiled proudly. "I also want to say how proud I am of my son." Jason grinned. Dad continued, "Jason is the future of this family. He'll take over everything I've built." More applause. Then, Dad looked directly at me. "And Emily." He laughed. "She still hasn't figured life out." The room exploded with awkward laughter. Someone actually clapped. My cheeks burned. I forced a smile. Maybe he wasn't finished. Maybe he'd say something nice next. Instead, he added, "She's always been the dreamer. I just hope she learns how the real world works before it's too late." Even my mother laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A genuine one. I looked around the room. No one defended me. Not my aunt. Not my uncle. Not my cousins. Not even Jason. He simply looked down at his plate. I quietly stood up. "I think I'm going to head home." Dad shrugged. "Already? It's getting late." Mom didn't even look up. "Drive safely." That was it. No one asked me to stay. No one followed me outside. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. For 10 minutes, I couldn't even start the engine, because something inside me had finally broken. That night, I made myself one promise. I would never beg for my parents' approval again. If they believed I was a failure, fine. I'd stop trying to prove them wrong. I'd simply build a life where their opinion no longer mattered. The next morning, I updated my resume. Within 3 weeks, I accepted a job in Dallas, Texas. It wasn't glamorous. A junior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. The salary wasn't amazing. The apartment was tiny. I knew no one there. But for the first time in years, the future belonged to me. The day I packed my car, Mom came outside. For a second, I thought she might hug me. Instead, she handed me an old cardboard box. Your childhood things. I looked inside. Old school trophies. Photo albums. A stuffed bear. Everything I'd left behind. I smiled sadly. So, this is goodbye? She folded her arms. You wanted your independence. You have it now. No hug. No, I love you. No call when you get there. Just silence. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked one last time at the house where I'd spent 26 years trying to earn a place I already should have had. I didn't know it then, but 5 years later, that very house would belong to me, and my parents would have absolutely no idea who had bought it. If you've ever been treated like you were never enough, let me know in the comments. Sometimes, sharing your story is the first step toward rewriting it. And if you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because what happened next changed all of our lives. When I crossed the Texas state line, I kept checking my phone. Not because I was expecting congratulations. Because somewhere deep inside me, I still hoped my parents would call. Maybe Dad would say, I'm proud of you for chasing your dreams. Maybe Mom would ask if I'd made it safely. Maybe Jason would text, good luck, Em. Hours passed. Nothing. Not a single message. By the time I reached my tiny apartment in Dallas, I finally accepted the truth. If I disappeared tomorrow, my family probably wouldn't notice for weeks. The apartment was barely 600 square feet. The carpet looked older than I was. The kitchen was so small I couldn't open the refrigerator and oven at the same time. The air conditioner rattled like it was about to fall out of the wall. But as I stood there surrounded by cardboard boxes, I smiled. For the first time in years, every decision inside those walls belonged to me. No comparisons. No criticism. No reminders that Jason was the successful one. Just silence. And strangely, silence felt peaceful. Monday morning arrived faster than I expected. My new office occupied the 12th floor of a downtown building overlooking the Dallas skyline. The company wasn't famous, but it had a reputation for promoting people based on performance instead of family connections. That sounded almost unreal to me. My manager, Sarah Mitchell, greeted me with a warm handshake. Welcome aboard, Emily. We've heard great things about your interview. Those simple words caught me off guard. No one had said they expected great things from me in a very long time. The first few months were brutal. I worked 12-hour days, studied late into the night, skipped weekends. While everyone else went home, I stayed. When people complained about difficult projects, I volunteered. Not because I wanted attention, because I was terrified of failing. Every mistake reminded me of my father's voice. Emily never figures things out. Every success whispered back. Maybe he was wrong. One evening, Sarah stopped by my desk. It's after 9. You know everyone else left hours ago? I laughed awkwardly. I just want everything to be perfect. She looked at me for a long moment, then quietly asked, who convinced you that perfect was the only way you'd be accepted? Her question hit harder than she probably realized. I didn't answer, because I already knew. 6 months later, the company announced promotions. I didn't expect much. I was still the newest analyst on the team. During the staff meeting, Sarah smiled. Our Employee of the Year. She paused. Emily Carter. For a second, I honestly thought she'd said someone else's name. People applauded. My coworkers stood. Sarah handed me a certificate and an envelope containing a $15,000 performance bonus. She leaned closer and whispered, you earned every dollar. I nearly cried. Not because of the money. Because someone had finally seen my effort. That night, without thinking, I called my parents. Mom answered after the fourth ring. Hello. Hi, Mom. Oh, Emily. I just wanted to tell you something. What is it? I got promoted today. Silence. Finally, she said. That's nice. No excitement. No questions. Then, you know Jason's opening another business next month. My smile disappeared. Oh, your father invested another $120,000. That's wonderful. You should support your brother more. Before I could respond, she ended the call. I stared at my phone for several minutes. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because somehow, even my biggest accomplishment had become another conversation about Jason. That was the last time I ever called them first. The years passed quickly. I earned my CPA license, completed my MBA through night classes, moved into a better apartment, bought my first car. Then another promotion came. By 30, I was earning more money than I'd ever imagined growing up. But something else had changed too. The desperate little girl who spent years chasing her parents' approval was slowly disappearing. Then one Sunday morning, everything changed. I was drinking coffee on my balcony when my phone buzzed. Jason. He hadn't called me in nearly 2 years. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hey. His voice sounded nervous. Emily, I need a favor. Of course he did. What kind of favor? It's Dad. My heart skipped. What happened? The construction company is struggling. Really struggling. I stayed quiet. Jason continued. They've taken out loans. A lot of loans. Business slowed down. Then a couple projects fell through. I listened carefully. Something felt off. So, what do you need from me? He cleared his throat. Dad thinks. Maybe you could loan us some money. I almost laughed. Loan? The same parents who refused to help me with $5,000? The same father who called me a failure in front of 80 guests? No. They needed me. How much? Another pause. $250,000. I actually stood up. $250,000? It's only temporary. We'll pay you back. I looked across the Dallas skyline. For years, I dreamed about hearing the words, Emily, we need you. But somehow, they didn't feel the way I'd imagined. I quietly asked, did Dad tell you to call? Yes. Did he apologize? Silence. Jason? No. Did Mom? No. So, they need my money. But not me. Jason didn't answer. Because he couldn't. I ended the call without saying yes. Or no. But something deep inside me whispered. This wasn't the whole story. Not even close. Because families don't ask for $250,000 unless they're hiding something much bigger. And I was about to find out exactly what that was. When I hung up with Jason, I couldn't focus on anything else. Not work. Not emails. Not the presentation I was supposed to give the next morning. One question kept replaying in my mind. Why would my parents suddenly need $250,000? Dad had always bragged about how successful his construction company was. According to him, business had never been better. Every Christmas newsletter, every Facebook post, every family gathering. It was always the same story. We're doing great. Business is booming. Jason is learning the ropes. So, what had changed? Or had they simply been lying to everyone? The next morning, I walked into Sarah's office. She immediately noticed something was wrong. You look like you didn't sleep. I didn't. I told her everything. Not every painful childhood memory. Just enough for her to understand why my family's phone call had shaken me. She listened without interrupting. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. Emily, I want you to answer one question. If this were anyone else's business, would you hand them $250,000 without seeing the financial records? I laughed. Of course not. So why are your parents different? I didn't have an answer. Sarah smiled gently. The accountant in you already knows what to do. Separate emotions from numbers. That afternoon, I did exactly that. A few phone calls. A few public records. Some legal databases. Everything was available if you knew where to look. Construction liens. Property filings. business loans, court documents. Within 2 hours, my stomach dropped. The company wasn't struggling. It was collapsing. Over the last 3 years, Dad had borrowed money from 3 different banks. Then he refinanced the business. Then he mortgaged their home. Then he borrowed against the company's equipment. Every time Jason's newest business idea failed, Dad covered the losses. Restaurant. Failed. Luxury car rental. Failed. Real estate flipping. Failed. Online clothing brand. Failed. Each disaster was buried under another loan, another signature, another promise. The total debt? Almost $2.8 million. I stared at my computer screen. How had they hidden this from everyone? Then I remembered something. Dad had always cared more about appearances than reality. As long as the neighbors believed he was successful, he could pretend everything was fine. Then I found something even worse. The family home, my childhood home, had already received a foreclosure notice. I blinked. Read it again. No, there had to be a mistake. The notice was real. Unless they paid the overdue balance within 90 days, the bank would take the house. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, Jason's phone call made perfect sense. They didn't need help. They needed a miracle. That evening, my phone rang again. Dad. For the first time in almost 3 years. I answered. Hello. No greeting. No small talk. Straight to business. Jason said you haven't answered. I've been busy. This is family, Emily. Family. The word almost made me smile. Now we were family. Interesting. We just need a temporary loan. I've been looking at the company's public filings. Silence. Then Dad cleared his throat. You've been spying on us? No. I've been protecting myself. His voice became colder. You don't understand business. I understand balance sheets. Another silence. Then he sighed dramatically. So you're just going to let your parents lose everything? There it was. The guilt. The same weapon they'd used my entire life. I took a deep breath. I have a question. What? If Jason hadn't lost millions, would you be asking me for help? No answer. Dad, it's complicated. No, it isn't. If I needed $250,000, would you give it to me? He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. You owe this family. I laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, you. We raised you. We gave you a home. We paid for food. I closed my eyes. Was he serious? He was describing parenting, as if feeding your own child created a lifelong debt. I'll think about it. Then I hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. A week later, I flew back to Nashville. Not because I'd decided to help, because I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. The same oak trees. The same white fences. The same mailbox I'd painted blue when I was 12. But something felt different. The house looked tired. The lawn hadn't been cut in weeks. Paint peeled from the porch railing. Even the flower beds Mom once obsessed over were overgrown with weeds. The perfect family image was finally cracking. I parked across the street. For nearly 20 minutes, I simply watched. Then I saw a black SUV pull into the driveway. A man in a gray suit stepped out carrying a folder. He knocked. Dad answered, even from across the street. I could tell the conversation wasn't friendly. The man handed Dad several papers. Dad signed one, then slammed the front door so hard the window shook. The man returned to his SUV and drove away. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked across the street. As I reached the porch, I noticed one sheet of paper lying near the steps. It had slipped from the folder. I picked it up. My heart stopped. Notice of foreclosure auction. Auction date: 32 days from today. The house would be sold to the highest bidder. I folded the paper slowly. A strange feeling settled over me. Not happiness. Not sadness. Something else. A realization. For the first time in my life, my parents were powerless. And they had no idea that I had just learned the date that would change all of our lives forever. I didn't knock on the front door. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to my rental car and sat there with the foreclosure notice resting on my lap. 32 days. That was all my parents had left before the bank auctioned the house. The same house where I'd spent 26 years trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. The same house where I celebrated birthdays no one remembered. The same house where I was told over and over again, "You'll never be as successful as your brother." I looked at the paper one last time before folding it neatly and placing it inside my purse. No matter what happened next, I wasn't going to make another emotional decision. This time, I'd let the facts lead the way. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Jason. "Emily, did you come to town?" I frowned. "How did you know?" "I saw your rental car across the street yesterday." Of course he had. "I need to talk to you." "I'm busy. Please. It'll only take 15 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop near the town square. Jason looked older than I remembered. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkled shirt. Nervous hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the confident golden child. He looked exhausted. "I'm glad you came." "I didn't come for coffee." "I know." He sighed. "I messed up." Those 4 words surprised me. Jason had never admitted he was wrong. Not once. What happened? He stared at the table. I kept thinking the next business would work. Dad believed in me. So did Mom. I didn't want to disappoint them. "You didn't. You bankrupted them." He closed his eyes. "I know." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I never asked them to treat you differently. I know. They always expected more from you." I laughed softly. "No, they expected less from you." He looked confused. "They forgave every mistake you made. They never forgave mine." Jason slowly nodded. "I guess I never saw it." "No, you never had to." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder. "Dad wanted me to give you this." Inside were loan documents, a repayment proposal, interest rates, collateral. Everything looked surprisingly professional. Until I reached the last page. My signature would make me personally responsible if the business failed again. I looked up. "So, if I help, I also inherit your debt?" Jason couldn't meet my eyes. "It's just a formality." I smiled. "No, it's a trap." I closed the folder. "I'm not signing." He looked panicked. "Emily, if you don't, we lose the house." I stayed calm. "The house was already mortgaged before you called me." His face turned pale. "You know, I know everything. The loans, the refinancing, the foreclosure, the failed businesses, the unpaid taxes, everything." Jason slowly leaned back in his chair. "I didn't think you'd find out. I became an accountant for a reason." That evening, I finally drove to the house. Dad answered the door. His smile disappeared the moment he saw me. "So, you decided to help?" "No, I decided to talk." He stepped aside. "Come in." Nothing inside had changed. The old family photos still lined the hallway. Except, something caught my attention. Every framed picture included Jason. Some included Mom and Dad. Very few included me. One family portrait from Christmas had actually been cropped. I remembered standing beside Jason when it was taken. Now, only half of my shoulder remained in the frame. I stared at it for several seconds. Dad noticed. "Your mother thought it looked better." I didn't say a word. Some wounds don't need fresh salt. We sat in the living room. Mom brought coffee. She smiled politely. It felt more like greeting a banker than a daughter. Dad got straight to the point. "We've prepared repayment terms. I'm not here about the loan." His expression hardened. "Then why are you here?" "I want the truth." "The truth?" "How long have you known you'd lose the house?" Silence. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at the floor. Finally, he answered. "About 8 months." 8 months. For 8 months. They had hidden everything. Yet the moment they needed money, They remembered they had a daughter. You told the whole family I was a failure. Dad rolled his eyes. Oh, not this again. No, exactly this. You embarrass me in front of everyone. I was joking. I wasn't laughing. Mom interrupted. Emily, families say things. I looked directly at her. Healthy families don't. Dad stood up. I'm done apologizing for words. You should be apologizing for actions. What actions? You spent hundreds of thousands trying to save Jason from his own mistakes. You couldn't even help me pay for my CPA exam. His face turned red. That was different. How? He needed help. So did I. You turned out fine. I almost smiled. Exactly. I turned out fine. Without them. As I stood to leave, Dad called after me. If this house is sold, it'll be your fault too. I turned slowly. No, it'll be the price of your choices. Then I walked out. For the first time in my life, I left that house without feeling guilty. 3 days later, I received an email from the bank. Not because of my parents. Because one of my company's investment clients specialized in distressed real estate. Attached was a public list of upcoming foreclosure auctions. I almost deleted it. Then one address caught my eye. 214 Willow Creek Lane. My childhood home. Auction date. Monday, 10 a.m. Minimum opening bid. $418,000. I stared at the number for a long time. Then, a thought entered my mind. A thought so unexpected that even I was shocked by it. What if, instead of saving my parents' house, I simply bought it myself? And this time, I would play by the rules they had spent their whole lives ignoring. For 3 nights, I barely slept. Not because I was unsure, because I was afraid of what buying that house would make me. Would it be revenge? Justice? Or was I becoming the same kind of person my parents had been? Every answer led to another question. So instead of asking my heart, I trusted my head. I opened my laptop and began doing what accountants do best. I ran the numbers. The house had been appraised at nearly $760,000 2 years earlier. Because of the foreclosure, the opening bid was only $418,000. Even if bidding became competitive, it was still a solid investment. The neighborhood had grown rapidly. Property values were rising every year. Financially, buying the house made perfect sense. Emotionally, it terrified me. The next morning, I called the investment firm that regularly purchased foreclosed properties. A senior broker named David Reynolds answered. What can I do for you? I'd like to participate in Monday's foreclosure auction. Have you done this before? No. Buying for yourself or as an investment? I hesitated. Both. He chuckled. That's usually how these stories start. If only he knew. David explained the process. To participate, I needed proof of funds. A certified deposit. Identity verification. Everything had to be completed before the auction. By Friday afternoon, every document was approved. Legally, I was now eligible to bid. I stared at the confirmation email for nearly 5 minutes. There was no turning back. Saturday morning, my phone rang again. Mom. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. Her voice sounded softer than usual. Emily. I've been thinking. That was new. You've always been the responsible one. I waited. We were wondering if maybe you could stay with us for a few days. I frowned. Why? So we can talk. No, not talk. Negotiate. There was a difference. I'm sorry. I don't think that's a good idea. Her voice changed instantly. So you're really going to let this family fall apart? There it was. The guilt. The same old script. Different day. Different crisis. Same manipulation. I answered calmly. The family fell apart years ago. It just took everyone else this long to notice. She didn't respond. Instead, she quietly hung up. For the first time, I wasn't shaking after talking to my mother. I simply placed my phone on the table and finished my coffee. Healing feels strange at first. One day, you realize the words that once destroyed you no longer have any power. Sunday evening, Jason showed up at my hotel. He looked desperate. I know about the auction. I froze. How? I overheard Dad talking to the bank. They're trying to stop it. I slowly opened the door wider. What do you want? He looked exhausted. I don't want money. I want honesty. I crossed my arms. Then start talking. Jason took a deep breath. Dad lied to everyone. I figured that out. No, you don't understand. He told the family you refused to help. He said you became selfish after moving to Texas. He told Aunt Susan you laughed when he asked for help. I stared at him. He said that. Jason nodded. Everyone thinks you abandoned us. I couldn't believe it. Even now, even after everything, my parents were still protecting their image by destroying mine. Jason reached into his jacket and handed me his phone. I recorded something yesterday. I pressed play. Dad's voice filled the room. Emily owes us. If she won't help, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter she really is. Then Mom spoke. Once this is over, nobody will believe her anyway. The recording ended. For several seconds, neither of us said a word. Finally, I whispered, "They haven't changed at all." Jason slowly shook his head. "No. They're just running out of people to blame." Monday morning arrived. 9:15 a.m. The county courthouse parking lot was already filling up. Investors, real estate agents, lawyers, people carrying folders and coffee cups. To them, this was just another business day. To me, it was the day 26 years of pain would finally come full circle. I parked across the street and sat quietly in my car. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I wasn't scared of spending the money. I was scared of seeing my parents lose everything. Despite everything they'd done, a part of me still loved them. Maybe that part always would. But love didn't mean sacrificing my future to rescue them from choices they refused to own. At exactly 9:52 a.m., I saw my parents arrive. Dad wore the same navy suit he used for weddings and funerals. Mom held his arm tightly. Jason walked a few steps behind them. His shoulders slumped. He looked nothing like the confident brother I'd grown up with. None of them noticed me. I adjusted my sunglasses and walked into the courthouse. The auction room wasn't large. Rows of folding chairs faced a small podium. About 30 bidders filled the room. Some chatted casually. Others reviewed paperwork. The atmosphere felt strangely calm, almost ordinary. Yet for one family, everything was about to change forever. I signed in under my legal name, Emily Carter. The clerk checked my identification. "You're all set, Miss Carter." My parents were only 20 feet away, but they never looked in my direction. Not once. They had absolutely no idea that the daughter they had called a failure was sitting quietly behind them, ready to bid on the only home they'd ever known. And in less than 10 minutes, the auction would begin. At exactly 10 a.m., the auctioneer walked to the front of the room. He adjusted his glasses, tapped the microphone once, and smiled politely. "Good morning, everyone. We'll begin with today's foreclosure properties." To everyone else, this was another Monday. To me, it felt like the final chapter of a life I'd been trying to leave behind. The first few properties sold quickly. A duplex, an empty lot, a small office building. Investors barely looked up from their paperwork. Bids flew across the room like routine conversation. $180,000. $185,000. Sold. 5 minutes later. Another property. Then another. I barely heard any of it. My eyes stayed fixed on the back of my father's head. For the first time in my life, he looked nervous. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then the auctioneer opened the next folder. Property number 27. My heart skipped. 214 Willow Creek Lane. Our opening bid is $418,000. The room became noticeably quieter. Several investors immediately lifted their bidder cards. The neighborhood was valuable. Everyone knew it. $418,000. $430,000. $445,000. $460,000. The numbers climbed rapidly. Dad squeezed Mom's hand. She looked as if she might cry. Jason stared silently at the floor. None of them could bid. They didn't have the money. All they could do was watch strangers compete for their home. $490,000. $505,000. $520,000. One investor finally stopped bidding. Another shook his head and lowered his paddle. Only two bidders remained. A real estate company. And me. The auctioneer looked around. $535,000. The investor across the room raised his paddle again. $540,000. I took a slow breath, then calmly lifted mine. $550,000. Several people turned to look at me. The investor hesitated. He whispered something to the man beside him. Then, he lowered his paddle. The auctioneer looked around the room. Any higher bids? Silence. Going once. My pulse pounded inside my ears. Going twice. Dad slowly closed his eyes. He already believed it was over. Then, the auctioneer smiled. Sold. To bidder number 27. The gavel struck the podium. The sound echoed through the room. I had just bought my childhood home. Mom buried her face in Dad's shoulder. Jason covered his eyes. Dad simply sat there, motionless. The house was gone. Or so they thought. As people stood to leave, I quietly walked toward the closing desk. The clerk smiled. Congratulations, Ms. Carter. We'll finalize everything this afternoon. She handed me several documents. One of them read, New property owner, Emily Carter. Seeing my own name there felt unreal. I had almost reached the hallway when I heard someone call my name. Emily? I turned. Jason stood there. His eyes moved from my face to the folder in my hands, then back again. His expression changed instantly. No, he whispered. No. His voice grew louder. You bought it. People nearby stopped walking. I looked at him quietly. Yes. He stared at me in complete disbelief. You bought the house? Before I could answer, Dad and Mom turned around. Dad frowned. What's going on? Jason couldn't even form a complete sentence. Dad, it was Emily. Dad looked confused. What are you talking about? Jason pointed toward the paperwork in my hands. She bought the house. The hallway became completely silent. Dad laughed. A short, nervous laugh. That's impossible. Mom looked at me, then at the folder, then back at me. Her face slowly lost all color. No, she whispered. No. Dad grabbed the paperwork from my hands before I could react. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His hands began shaking. Printed in bold letters. Purchaser, Emily Carter. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Dad looked up at me, his voice barely above a whisper. You bought her house? I answered calmly. No, I bought a house. The bank sold it. I simply placed the highest bid. His face turned bright red. You planned this. I shook my head. No, you planned this. You borrowed against everything. You ignored every warning. You chose Jason's failures over reality. The bank planned the auction. I just showed up. Mom suddenly stepped forward. Tears streamed down her face. Emily, please. This is still our home. I looked around the hallway. For the first time, they weren't speaking to me like I was a disappointment. They were speaking to me like I mattered. Strange how quickly respect appears when people need something. Dad's voice cracked. What do you want? That question hung in the air. What did I want? An apology? Justice? Revenge? Money? No. What I wanted couldn't be bought. Not even with a house. I looked directly into my father's eyes, then quietly said, I want the truth. His expression changed, because for the first time in his life, he couldn't hide behind pride. And what he confessed next would shock our entire family. If you've made it this far, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And tell me in the comments. If you were in Emily's position, would you let your parents stay in the house, or would you make them leave? The courthouse hallway had gone completely silent. People who had been walking toward the elevators had stopped. Lawyers, real estate agents, investors. even the auction staff. No one said a word. My father stood frozen, gripping the purchase documents so tightly the pages crumpled in his hands. For the first time in my life, Richard Carter had no speech prepared, no audience to impress, no excuses left to hide behind. I looked at him and quietly repeated, "I asked you one question. What truth have you been hiding all these years?" Dad swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled sadly. "Really? You told everyone I refused to help. You told the family I abandoned you. You told them I became selfish." I pulled out my phone. And I know that wasn't the only lie. His eyes widened. Jason slowly stepped backward. Mom looked from me to Dad, completely confused. "What lie?" she asked. I pressed play. The recording Jason had given me echoed through the hallway. "Emily owes us. If she won't help, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter she really is. Nobody will believe her anyway." Every word bounced off the courthouse walls. Mom covered her mouth. Jason closed his eyes. Dad looked as though all the air had left his body. The recording ended. No one moved. Mom turned toward him. "You said that." Dad didn't answer. "Richard, you said that." He finally whispered. I was angry. Mom shook her head. "No, you were lying." She looked at me. "Emily, I didn't know." I met her eyes. "I believe you." Then I added quietly, "But you laughed while he humiliated me." She immediately looked away. Because that, she couldn't deny. Dad suddenly raised his voice. "I did what I had to do." People turned toward us. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The company was falling apart. I was trying to save this family." I shook my head. "No, you were trying to save your pride." His face hardened. "I built everything we had. And then you risked everything to protect Jason from consequences." Jason stepped forward. "Dad, she's right." Dad turned toward him. "You stay out of this." "No, I won't." Jason took a deep breath. "Every failed business. You paid my debts. I kept asking for another chance because you never let me fail." His voice trembled. "I wasn't your greatest success. I became your biggest mistake." The hallway became so quiet that I could hear the air conditioner humming overhead. Dad stared at his son. He looked completely lost. For years, he had convinced himself he was protecting Jason. Now, even Jason was telling him the truth. Mom slowly sat down on a nearby bench. Tears rolled down her face. "I ruined both of my children." No one answered. Because deep down, we all knew she wasn't completely wrong. She had protected Jason, ignored me, and enabled Dad every step of the way. Finally, Dad looked at me again. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "What happens now?" That question carried 26 years of history. When I was little, he made every decision. Now, for the first time, the decision belonged to me. I looked at the purchase agreement, then back at my parents. "The law says I own the house." Dad slowly nodded. "Yes, but I'm not interested in revenge." Both of them looked surprised. "I didn't buy the house to throw you onto the street." Mom burst into tears. Dad looked as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I continued. "You can stay there." His eyes widened. "What?" "You'll stay as tenants." Silence. "You'll pay fair market rent. You'll maintain the property. You'll respect the lease. And you'll understand something you've never understood before. This house is no longer yours." Dad's shoulders dropped. He had expected punishment. Instead, he received dignity. The very thing he had never given me. Then I added one final condition. "And there's something else." Dad looked up. "You've spent years telling everyone I was a failure." He nodded slowly. "You're going to tell them the truth." His expression froze. "Every relative, every family friend, every neighbor, everyone who believed your lies. You're going to tell them exactly what happened. And you're going to tell them that your daughter saved the home you couldn't." For several seconds, he didn't speak. Then, for the first time in my entire life, my father looked me straight in the eyes and quietly said, "I'm sorry." Not, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Not, mistakes were made. Not, let's move on. Just, I'm sorry. I had imagined hearing those words for years. Strangely, they didn't erase the past. But they did something else. They finally ended it. 1 week later, my phone began exploding with messages. Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, old neighbors, family friends, one after another. They all said the same thing. We didn't know. We believed what your father told us. We're so sorry. Then Aunt Susan called. Emily, your father invited the whole family over yesterday. I frowned. What happened? He stood in the living room and admitted everything. He told everyone you weren't the failure. He was. I closed my eyes. Not because I was celebrating, because for the first time, the truth no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to everyone. But I still had one final decision to make. A decision that would determine whether my family deserved a second chance, or whether some doors should remain closed forever. People think revenge ends the moment the other person apologizes. It doesn't. An apology can acknowledge the past, but it can't rebuild trust. Trust takes something much harder. Time. 3 weeks after the auction, I drove back to Nashville. Not because I missed the city, because I had one final piece of business to handle. As the legal owner of the property, I needed to inspect the house before signing the lease agreement. The same front porch, the same white columns, the same wind chime Mom had bought 20 years earlier. Everything looked familiar. Yet somehow, nothing felt like home anymore. I unlocked the front door. It was strange. For 26 years, I'd needed permission to enter. Now, the key belonged to me. I slowly walked inside. The living room smelled exactly the same. Old books, fresh coffee, a hint of cedar from the fireplace. Memories rushed back faster than I expected. Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, school photos, arguments, silence, tears. Some houses don't just hold furniture. They hold every version of the person you used to be. Mom appeared from the kitchen. She looked surprised. I didn't hear you come in. I have keys now. Those words hung in the air. She nodded quietly. I know. For the first time. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only regret. Dad walked in a few moments later. He looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. Pride had finally left his shoulders. Replacing it was humility. Thanks for coming. I'm here for the inspection. He nodded. I understand. The inspection took less than an hour. The roof needed repairs. The water heater was nearly finished. Some windows would need replacing before winter. Dad apologized every time I found another problem. Years ago, he would have blamed someone else. Now, he simply accepted responsibility. It was the first real change I'd ever seen in him. When we finished, Mom quietly asked, "Would you stay for dinner?" I hesitated. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't sure I was ready. Then, I looked around the dining room. For the first time. Only 3 plates sat on the table. No relatives. No neighbors. No audience. Just a family trying to figure out whether it still deserved to call itself one. I'll stay. Mom smiled through tears. Thank you. Dinner felt awkward. Nobody talked much. Finally, Dad broke the silence. I've sold the construction company. I looked up. I thought there wasn't anything left to sell. There wasn't. I sold the name, the equipment, the contracts, everything. He sighed. I'm starting over. At 65 years old. Starting over. Life has a strange way of humbling people. Jason arrived halfway through dinner. He looked different too. No expensive watch. No designer clothes. Just jeans. A polo shirt. And a tired smile. I got a job. I blinked. What kind? Project coordinator. For another construction company. No ownership. No investors. No shortcuts. He laughed softly. For the first time in my life, I'm earning a paycheck. I smiled. How does it feel? Honestly, peaceful. For the rest of the evening, nobody argued. Nobody compared us. Nobody mentioned success or failure. It was the quietest family dinner we'd ever shared. And somehow, the healthiest. A month later, the lease agreement officially began. My parents became my tenants. Every month, the rent arrived on time. No excuses. No late payments. Dad even included handwritten notes. The plumbing repair has been completed. The roof inspection passed. Thank you for replacing the furnace. Every note ended the same way. Thank you for giving us another chance. One Saturday morning, I received another phone call. This time, it wasn't from my parents. It was my old neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Emily? Yes, I just wanted you to know. Your father has been helping people around the neighborhood. I smiled. He has? He fixes fences, cleans gutters, repairs porches. He refuses payment. I frowned. Why? Mrs. Patterson laughed softly. He says he's paying back a debt. That evening, I drove past the house. Dad was repairing an elderly neighbor's mailbox. He didn't know I was watching. There were no cameras, no audience, no praise. Just a man trying to become someone better than he used to be. For years, I'd wanted him to become successful. I finally realized he was becoming something far more valuable. A decent man. 6 months later, I received an invitation. Not to a birthday. Not to Christmas. Not to Thanksgiving. It was from Dad. The envelope simply read, "Family dinner. No speeches. No celebrations. No business partners. No pretending. Just family." I almost said no. Then I remembered something my therapist had told me. Forgiveness isn't reopening the same chapter. It's choosing not to keep rereading it. So, I went. As everyone gathered around the table, Dad stood up. I felt my stomach tighten. For years, his speeches had always ended with someone getting hurt. Instead, he raised his glass. I spent most of my life believing success meant owning a company, having a big house, or impressing everyone around me. He looked directly at me. I was wrong. My greatest success was standing right in front of me. Tears filled Mom's eyes. Jason quietly smiled. Dad continued. Emily, you didn't just save this house. You saved this family. The room fell silent. Not the uncomfortable silence I remembered from years ago. A peaceful one. The kind that comes after the truth has finally been spoken. I smiled. Not because I had finally won, but because I no longer needed to. If this story reminded you that forgiveness and boundaries can exist together, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me, would you have let your parents stay in the house, or would you have walked away forever? 3 months after that family dinner, I thought the story was finally over. The house was stable. My parents paid rent on time. Jason kept his job. For the first time in decades, our family wasn't pretending to be happy. We were simply peaceful. I had learned that peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes, it arrives quietly on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was wrong. Because that Tuesday, a phone call changed everything. Miss Carter. This is Michael Evans with Heritage Home Inspections. Yes, we found something during the attic inspection. My heart skipped. Is there a problem? No. It's unusual. What do you mean? We discovered a locked metal box hidden behind the insulation. I frowned. A lockbox? Yes. Since you're the legal owner, we'd like you to come identify it. By Thursday afternoon, I was back in Nashville. The attic was hotter than I remembered. Dust floated through the sunlight streaming from a small window. The inspector pointed toward an old wooden beam. There, a gray metal box sat tucked behind decades of insulation. It looked old. Very old. Any idea what's inside? I shook my head. No. The lock had rusted over years ago. With my permission, the inspector carefully cut it open. Inside, there were only 3 things. An old leather notebook, a yellow envelope, and a small silver key. The notebook belonged to my grandfather, Richard Carter's father. I recognized his handwriting immediately. My grandfather had died when I was 12. He had always been kind to me. Unlike almost everyone else in the family, he never treated Jason and me differently. I sat on the attic floor and opened the first page. The journal wasn't about money or business. It was about family. Every few pages, he wrote little lessons. Success without character is failure wearing a nice suit. Never compare your children. Comparison creates winners and orphans. I stopped reading. Those words hit harder than anything else, because they described my childhood perfectly. Then I reached the final pages. My hands froze. There was a letter addressed to Richard, my father. It had never been opened. The envelope was still sealed. For nearly 30 years, I carried everything downstairs. My parents were in the kitchen. Dad looked confused. What's that? I think it's something Grandpa wanted you to read. His expression changed the moment he saw the handwriting. He slowly took the envelope. His hands trembled. I've never seen this before. You never looked in the attic? He quietly shook his head. No. He opened the envelope carefully. The room became silent. As he read, his eyes filled with tears. Halfway through, his voice broke. Mom reached for his hand. He couldn't continue. Instead, he handed the letter to me. Read it. I hesitated. Are you sure? He nodded. I unfolded the paper. The ink had faded slightly, but every word was still clear. Richard, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I made mistakes raising you. I praised success more than kindness. I cared too much about what other people thought. Please don't make the same mistake with your own children. They don't need a perfect father. They need one who loves them equally. One day your children will remember how you made them feel, not how much money you earned. If you ever have to choose between protecting your pride or protecting your family, choose your family. Pride can always be rebuilt. Relationships rarely can. The room was completely silent. Dad covered his face with both hands. I never got to read this. No, he whispered. I never wanted to. He looked around the room. I spent my whole life trying to become more successful than my father. A tear rolled down his cheek, and I became exactly what he warned me not to become. Jason walked over quietly. He placed a hand on Dad's shoulder. I let you believe I needed saving. Dad looked at him. No, I wanted someone to save. Then he turned toward me, and I ignored the child who never asked for anything. For the first time, no one defended themselves. No one made excuses. The truth was finally enough. A few days later, Dad asked if he could borrow the letter. I'd like to frame it. Not for me. He smiled sadly. For the house. So I never forget it again. I nodded. It's yours. The following weekend, I visited the house one more time. The letter now hung in the hallway. Not beside awards. Not beside business certificates. Not beside family portraits. It stood alone. A daily reminder. That success means very little if the people you love feel like strangers. As I looked at the framed letter, I realized something. Buying the house had never been the greatest victory. Changing what happened inside it was. 1 year later, I pulled into the driveway just before sunset. The maple tree in the front yard had grown taller. The porch had fresh white paint. The flower beds were blooming again. For the first time in years, the house looked alive. Not because someone had spent money on it, because someone had finally started taking care of it. Dad was on a ladder replacing a porch light. Jason was mowing the lawn. Mom was planting flowers near the walkway. When they saw my car, they all smiled. Not the forced smiles people use for family photos. Real ones. The kind that reach your eyes. So, Dad laughed. I finally figured out how to replace that light. I smiled. Only took you 20 years. He laughed harder. I deserved that. A year ago, he would have argued. Today, he could laugh at himself. That told me everything I needed to know. We sat on the porch drinking iced tea. Nobody talked about money. Nobody mentioned the auction. Nobody brought up the past. Sometimes, healing isn't talking about what happened. It's proving day after day that you're different now. As the sun began to set, I reached into my bag. I have something. Dad looked confused. What is it? I handed him a thick envelope. He slowly opened it. Inside were several legal documents. He adjusted his glasses, then looked back at me. I don't understand. Keep reading. His hands began to shake. Mom leaned closer. Jason stopped smiling. The first page read, Warranty Deed. Property Transfer. Grantor. Emily Carter. Grantees. Richard Carter and Linda Carter. Dad stared at the page, then at me, then back at the page again. No. His voice cracked. No. He pushed the papers back toward me. I can't accept this. I gently slid them back. I know. That's why I waited a year. Mom was already crying. Emily. Why? I looked around the porch. At the freshly painted railings, the repaired roof, the healthy flowers. Then at the 3 people sitting in front of me. Because this year, you didn't ask me for money. You didn't lie. You didn't blame anyone else. You worked. You changed. And you earned something far more valuable than this house. Dad whispered. What? My trust. He buried his face in his hands. I don't deserve it. I smiled softly. Maybe not. But neither did I. The words hung in the evening air. For 26 years, I'd wanted my parents to understand how that felt. Now, they finally did. Jason looked at me with tears in his eyes. You know, I always thought you bought the house to prove you were better than us. I shook my head. No, I bought it because, for the first time, I had the chance to decide what kind of person I wanted to become. He nodded slowly. And you chose kindness. I smiled. I chose peace. Dad signed nothing that night. Instead, he folded the papers carefully and handed them back. I'll accept these. Only if you promise me one thing. What? If we take this house back, you'll never stop coming home. That sentence hit me harder than anything he'd ever said. Because for the first time, he wasn't asking for my money. He was asking for me. I laughed through tears. I think I can do that. He stood up, walked across the porch, and hugged me. Not the quick, awkward hugs we'd shared at holidays. A real hug. The kind fathers are supposed to give their daughters. I closed my eyes. Not because the pain had disappeared. Some scars never do. But because, for the first time, the little girl who spent years wondering why she wasn't enough finally understood something. She had always been enough. Her parents had simply been too broken to see it. 6 months later, the paperwork was finalized. The house legally belonged to my parents again. There was only one condition written into the agreement. If they ever tried to borrow against it, or use it to rescue another reckless business venture, ownership would automatically return to me. Dad laughed when he read the clause. Still the accountant. Always. A few weeks later, the family gathered for Thanksgiving. This time, there were no speeches about success, no comparisons, no favorite child, just laughter, stories, homemade pie, and one framed letter hanging in the hallway. My grandfather's words. Choose your family over your pride. No one walked past it without reading it. Not anymore. Looking back, people often ask me if buying my parents' house was the greatest revenge. They're always surprised by my answer. It wasn't revenge. Revenge would have left them homeless. Justice made them face the consequences of their choices. Forgiveness gave them the chance to become better people. And seeing them actually change, that was worth far more than any house. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't proving my parents wrong. It was proving to myself that I never needed their approval to become successful. I only needed the courage to believe in myself. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that your past does not define your future. And tell me in the comments. If you had been in Emily's place, would you have kept the house or given it back after everything that happened? Until next time, remember this. Sometimes the people who underestimate you become the very people who teach you how strong you really are.